of the book of John to the different gospels that we have previously read. So before we get started on that, I had an idea, and if you guys want to do it, that's totally cool. But in the plenary session that we attended like 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of emphasis on chapter 1 of John. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then it continues to say Word and God. And I was wondering if we could kind of review the importance of Word and like how it meant something different than how we kind of take it now, because I feel like that's really important to the rest of the chapter or book. So yeah.
Well, in the plenary session, who was the professor speaking?
Lucci.
Okay, sorry. He said that got translated sort of like weirdly, and that actually instead of word it was logos. They intended it to be. So that just sort of gives it like a different meaning rather than word.
Yeah. So.
Professor, does logos mean anything other than word?
Logos is an extremely its definitions are many. It means word, but it can also mean idea, theory. We get the word, the concept logic from it because it can refer to, a set of ideas, a system, if you will. It also refers to a speech. Okay, it's also contrasted against in the Greek sort of intellectual system. There's a contrast between logos, that is word, and ergon, which is deed. So it can be, where we do. In fact, we have that, sort of expression, indeed. Okay. Did you do something? Indeed, I did it. Okay. So we have that. We have somewhat that same. Well, they say that, but what do they do? So logos has this wide range of meanings. So it can mean word, and it does mean word, but it can also mean a sentence, a speech, an idea, a theory, all kinds of things. For what I think that the writer of John is certainly fully aware of the full range of meanings that logos has, and I do think that he is in particular drawing on the notion that the logos is a plan, an arrangement of the universe, more than just a word, but certainly a concept that is. And I do think this is an important thing, is always going to be contrasted with ergon, that is works. And I think that what you see here is that Jesus goes from being a logos to an ergon. I mean, he becomes manifest, and the works that you see in here are a representation of the other half of that very basic Greek binary arrangement. Are you ready for another Greek amazing thing? Okay. We have a This is the phos, okay, is the Greek word which means light, okay? It's a contraction of Theos, okay, Theos. And this word, phos, means man, human, mortal.
The first one means light, you said?
Mm-hmm.
What is the second one?
The first one, phos, is a contraction of Theos, okay? But focus on the first two, all right? Phos, okay, phos with a circumflex, phos, as opposed to phos, right? So this is there's a punning that goes on here when he refers to light, okay? There's punning involving the light and person. Okay,
and going off of that with light and the honey, further on in that chapter, it talks about life and light and the darkness. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, so going, kind of relating the two for our topic of discussion. In the introduction to John, the first paragraph on page 1881, it basically talks about how John celebrates Jesus differently. As we said that like the perception of Jesus is kind of changing throughout all of these gospels. And so I was wondering if we could kind of, our topic of discussion is to compare the two. So if anyone has any outstanding relationship differences that you want to start off with, I think that'd be really cool. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah, so John has a more of an idealistic view of Jesus and is kind of more of a heavenly body than a real person, as we've seen in other gospels. So if anyone has like an outstanding example of that, you want to get started. Let's start with the prologue, or what's identified as the prologue. So that's 1.1 through 1.18. Does anyone?
As it sort of points out in that paragraph on 181 that you were talking about, this beginning, where in Matthew we see sort of his introduced through his birth and his childhood. Here there's this idea that in some way Jesus is the birth of an idea or some sort of essence that already existed. Which sort of begins this idea that is seen several times, I think, in John, almost equating Jesus and God in a way that Matthew and Mark do not. It's one of the things that the other Jews get angry at, for instance, was this equating of the father-son relationship. I think it's in 5. But there's certainly this introduction with the word, or this essence being with God, seems to equate them in a way that Mark and Matthew do not as much.
In 3033, it says, born from above.
Yeah, it several times it
Yeah.
talks about being born from above.
In case that specific passage you're looking for was 5:16 through 18. Ending with, for this reason the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God.
If we could look for a second at John 5:16, it says, "Therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus." I think that's an interesting statement, because as we've seen in the Old Testament, Jesus, or God, the Yahweh, decided to save the Jews because they were a special people. And so, I mean, I understand that it's kind of like someone coming in and saying, "Oh, I am the person that has saved your ancestry." But I feel like they wouldn't be as harsh to Jesus. Like if they come from the same God and they believe in the same idea, I feel like they shouldn't be as harsh. But I mean, obviously that didn't happen. So
Especially since, like, I think it was in Mark, I'm really not sure which book it was in, but it's talking about how there was already a division between the Sadducees and the Pharisees because one believed in, like, the resurrection, angel, and the spirit, and the other didn't. And so, like, there's already kind of this conflict of ideas, like, in a very general sense, like, already existing. So it's surprising that, like, because he was bringing new ideas, like, that was a point of, like, such controversy since, like, there was already, like, you know, from the background that there was already some. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is that, like, there was already controversy between the very things he was talking about, like the resurrection.
And I think that's kind of where it all started, like the divide between Christianity and Judaism, like really started. Like I feel like it's kind of escalating throughout all of the Gospels, but here it's easier to see a greater divide between like the new ideas and the traditional ideas.
Speaking of divide, 117, where is it? 117, the text says something like Moses. That's what I pointed
law indeed was
The
given
law,
through Moses,
yeah.
grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But that's something that I noticed John was doing more than either Mark or Matthew, was this sort of separation from the Jews, because they're in John 7:1, it says the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. There are a couple places where it specifically talks about, in 5:18 or something, it specifically talks about the Jews being hateful or towards Jesus. And in response, there are several moments where Jesus is like, Moses gave you these laws, but you do not follow them. Abraham gave you these laws, but you do not follow them. So it feels like in John, more than in either Mark or Matthew, there's this differentiating between Jesus and his followers and who the Jews were at that time. And I don't know if it's sort of indicative, I think it is indicative of the formation of Christianity as a separate religion, but also it sort of seems that it's putting that same emphasis on the current Jews are doing it wrong, since it's these comments like, you're not following the rules that you say you're following, and this is how Jews should be doing it. So I think I can see how it's sort of both things.
And the way you phrase that really reminds me of like in some of Paul's writings, when he's talking about like, since I offered it to you first, the Jews, and you have rejected it, it goes to the Gentiles now. That kind of reminds me of like, you have like rejected it, and so now like, I think there's one part where he says you've proven yourself unworthy of it. How do you guys see that connection?
What was your question?
My question is like in Paul's writing, sometimes he uses the phrase like, since the Jews have rejected it, it goes on to the Gentiles. And there's one part where it says, I think, you have judged yourself unworthy. How do you see that connection to in John when he repeatedly says like, you're doing this wrong, like you're not following the laws of Abraham?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in John in John 8, like just after what Casey was talking about, starting at like with John 7 with the story of the woman who was caught in adultery, but then he says, let all who have not sinned stone her, and then everyone leaves, and then he says, neither do I condemn you, go your way, and from now on do not sin again. And then in that next paragraph, starting at John 8:12, it talks about, and then going down to John 15, you judge by human standards, I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid, for it is not I alone who judge, but I am the Father who sent me. And so I mean, Julie, that's kind of like what you were talking about with how he judges through himself and God, and how people are interpreting the laws put down by Moses and how they're actually being followed.
So like, I think I'm still like slightly touchy on the other thing, but what I'm like hearing is that you guys think that John and Paul both have like harsher views of like how the Jews are interpreting the laws. Is that what you're saying?
I guess.
Or they're like more critical?
I guess I don't have as specific of a claim as that. I'm just noticing the connection between Paul talking about you judge yourself unworthy and you've rejected like what I'm teaching, so it goes to Gentiles, and then John saying something. I guess I don't have like a definite
Yeah,
I'm just
I
noticing
think-
the connection.
I think you see a similar idea in Mark and Matthew as well, but John seems to be more severe about it. Seems to place a greater emphasis on this divide and villainizing the Jews. I mean,
I feel like that could be attributed to who it's targeting, because wasn't Matthew targeted to the Jews? So like he couldn't, I feel like if he was being really harsh and like very critical of them, they would sort of reject that. Because I don't like, if you try to like approach people by being like, you're wrong, that's not really gonna, no one wants to hear that. So I feel like John sort of is able to do that since he is like writing to the Greeks. So, I don't know, that's just kind of like how I'm interpreting what you guys are saying. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
Did John write after the previous disciples, right? Yeah, I mean, it could be also that more time passed and the separation between Jews and Christians, if I can call them that way, at that point was more distinct, I guess, by that time. Because at the beginning, Christians believed themselves to be Jews that just believe in a Messiah that is Jesus Christ, and the other Jews just didn't recognize him as Messiah. And so maybe the separation became more visible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the difference in time in which it was written also affects the writing style and the focus of the subject material. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew and Mark, are a lot more descriptive, it seems to me, and like they're, like a description of the events, just really trying to describe what happened. And John, as we already established, is a lot more ideological, and at times it's also more reflective. Like it's clear that he's writing these events based on like how he perceives them now, like with his understanding now. Like a lot of times he'll say like, as it was remembered or as we remembered it. And so like in 2:17, it says his disciples remembered that it was written, and then there's the phrase. And then just a few verses down in 22, it says, after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this. So it seems that it's a lot more, like, because it was written later on, it's a lot more reflective, and that he's acknowledging that, like, the exact, like, description of facts may not be true. Like, I think that, yeah. And there's a couple other instances of that as well.
What do you mean when you say description of fact?
Like, well, first of all, there's a large amount of subject matter that was just omitted from John. Like, there was the temptation of Jesus, like that doesn't occur in John. There was Jesus' transfiguration, like that doesn't occur. A lot of the parables aren't in there at all. There's no like stories of him like casting out demons. Like a lot of the material just isn't there. And when it is, a lot of times it comes in the form of like speeches and like discourses. Like there's a chapter just like devoted to a speech, And for that reason, it seems more like it's focusing, like it still talks about Jesus and like some signs and miracles he did, but it just seemed to me like there was a greater emphasis on his ideology and like how those signs like reflect his power, how those signs like matter to us now. Whereas Matthew and Mark were really, they were more, it seemed like, this is what Jesus did, and then he said this parable, and then he went and did this, and then he cast out the demons. And it was still like asserting that Jesus is God, but it just seemed more emphasized in John.
Yeah, and in John 21:25, it says, but there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written, which is how it ends. So yeah, it's exactly right, that it's almost self-awarely excluding a lot of things that Mark and Matthew both included.
Yeah, and I've been trying to, figure out why he like included what he did and why he excluded what he did. And I'm still struggling to see like a pattern for the exact things that he chose to include and the exact things he chose to exclude. Like originally I was thinking, maybe he's focusing more on like the ideology, or like he's only focusing on like the teachings, but he still does include like some miracles that happen. Like there's like a wedding scene where he turns water into wine, and that's not even included in the others. And like he thought it was important that was included in this one.
He doesn't in the story of the crucifixion. He doesn't include Jesus calling out to God, right? Which both Matthew, I believe that's right. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and I just didn't see it. But both Matthew and Mark include the detail of him yelling, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which translates to, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's in Matthew 27:46, and in Mark 15:34. And so I don't think that was included in John, and that seemed to really draw light on the fact that John was trying to, it seemed to me, characterized Jesus in a less human way than Mark and Matthew did, because he seems to have this moment of calling out, like, why have you forsaken me? Why are you rejecting me? Doesn't happen in John, which, I don't know, it seemed to me that not including that detail that both Mark and Matthew included was significant, because it separated him from being human in a way that John does, I think, more, like walking on the water and things like that seem to make it. And at the very beginning, this word, he is the word, seems to be inferring that he's godly in a way that Mark and Matthew did not.
Where was it in Mark again? Sorry.
I think this.
Jesus actually does speak. He doesn't say that my God, why have you forsaken me? But John does record Jesus speaking right before he's crucified. And I don't know, he says, I am thirsty, and then it is finished.
Yeah,
and so I see what you're saying, but
it seems much more accepting and peaceful, like I'm fulfilling my role.
But couldn't you also say that even just saying I'm thirsty is acknowledging like the human aspect, that, you know, he is like so aware of everything, like of his bodily state, that like he like desires water, like something to partially quench his thirst. Like a lot of times that statement is taken metaphorically. There's a lot of
and I
things
would
he's thirsty for.
I would say that in John especially, he talks a lot about like that woman who comes to the well, about her thirst being quenched by God and not actually by water.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but just even in the literal translation of that, I felt like that was also just asserting his humanity.
I guess I didn't pick up on that mostly because, like, it says in order to fulfill the scripture, and like, I guess you could say like he did it and then it fulfilled the scripture, but like when I was just reading it first off, my interpretation was like he was specifically doing it for the purpose of fulfilling the scripture.
what specifically was he doing?
Oh, I'm sorry, 28, John 19:28. The English word.
Yeah.
Because it says in order to fulfill the scripture. I guess like when I first read it, I'm not thinking like he said he was thirsty and that fulfilled the scripture. I'm like reading it like in order to like I guess like that he was aware that he needed to do that. Like I kind of just like took it as like something he did because not so much like
We
his
all know
humanity.
this is part of the story, so we have to make sure that he says it. Yeah.
It said that I cannot recall I cannot find the specific place, but it says that Jesus foresaw his own death.
There's something else.
Yeah, it says
Along your lines, there's not the scene when in the Garden of Gethsemane in here either, which is where he's praying to God about his fate, and that goes along with your humanizing him.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I have a question about to anyone who knows the answer. In John 19:16 and 17, it says, then he handed over to them to be crucified, so they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull. So Jesus is carrying his own cross. Is that how it happens in Mark and Matthew as well? Or does somebody else carry his cross?
Doesn't
Simon
he here? Yeah.
I thought somebody else did. Yeah.
But didn't I think I'm trying to remember just because like they were different, but didn't like he start carrying it and then someone
took it from him.
So it's like it's just a detail of when someone's taking it from him.
Does anyone have the
Oh.
the place in Mark and Matthew that happens?
It's in Matthew 27:32.
And Mark 15:21.
So that's interesting. Does anyone have any thoughts about why that might be?
all the movies that I've seen, in all the movies or cartoons that I've seen, or pictures, drawings, Jesus carries his own cross.
I think like you could use this to argue your point that like John shows Jesus as like more solemn, accepting, like holy person, because in Mark and Matthew he's both, you know, like having someone else carrying it, so that just shows sort of like a weakness on his part or like some sort of downfall, where John is like he's able to like not only like accept his fate, but like he's literally like carrying the thing that's going to like be his end. So I guess you could like argue your point But I don't know if that was John's purpose in including it in this one.
Guys, there's one thing that's been bugging me. Speaking of the cross, in Acts, in several places it says that Jesus was killed on a tree, lynched on a tree. So like,
It says he was killed on a tree because the cross is made of wood.
okay, that's fine.
It's,
That
the
was-
cross is also, I mean, symbolic of a tree as well. I mean, it's metaphorical use.
Coming back to Casey's point about and Julie's point about him knowing his fate, and he just doing things just because he knows his future. It just reminds me of Aeneid, where Aeneas knew his future and he followed his fate. And in some places he had to even be reminded of his fate, which is really.
Especially since in both, like since you bring that up in both, it's not like, is this gonna happen? It's gonna be easy. In both, it was like there's gonna be suffering that'll happen, because here it's like the Son of Man will have to suffer, and he's talking about like when we arrive, like there's gonna be like a lot of fighting. It's like,
Yeah.
I guess just both, like it's not gonna be easy.
So something that I've kind of been wondering about is if John wrote this as kind of like an evolution of this new idea of the Messiah, or if it was kind of like brought about by the people and then John was recording it as people are kind of adapting it, if that makes any sense. So like, did the people start thinking like this and then John wrote it, or did John write it and then that influenced the people to think like this? Because I feel like this perception of Jesus is a more modern view than the previous Gospels. So like you can relate like modern Christianity to more of these stories, and like you see like when we were talking about Jesus carrying the cross by himself, like you don't usually see someone else helping him, and I feel like that derives more from John than any of the other Gospels. So do
All
you
the Catholic churches that I've been in, the stained glass windows are just him carrying the cross himself.
exactly?
On that point, there's like, what is it? There's like the 17 stations or something that they celebrate for Easter and Lent, and like one of the stations is devoted to Simon picking up the cross. So Catholics aren't like leaving that out.
So do you think that this text just really influenced people to think about it differently, or was it the other way around?
It's a tough question. I think it's a
Probably
little bit of both.
Okay.
John could have added his own perspective into it, but he had to be influenced by somebody to do that.
I mean, how much do we know about John? Like, wasn't he going out and preaching to the people? Presumably, I thought he was, preaching God's word up until the point when he decided to write this. So, he's preaching the word of God, and obviously there's a little bit of like back and forth because he's being shaped by them. He's seeing how the ideology actually plays out in life, how it works out. They're asking him questions. He's thinking about his own beliefs. I mean, there's no textual evidence for what I'm saying, but that's what I imagine happened.
Just in the introduction on 1:879, it talks about, it says, modern scholars think it's more likely written by a disciple of John. But that doesn't.
So somewhere on the internet, I read that it could have been written by his translator.
So it's kind of the same thing as Socrates and how he had, it's like one of those Socratic writings, and how Socrates may not have actually said it, but he's just used as that figure to kind of portray the point and just kind of carry out that idea that they want to bring across and like teach people.
Isn't that true for a lot of the other books written in here? Like, we're not totally sure who wrote it, but like we have a vague idea, maybe, just to get the point across.
We have no information about who wrote these. The attributions are all late. They're all based, to a certain extent, on internal references, okay? But there is absolutely no way of recovering who the authors are of these.
Unless we invent a time machine in the future. Sorry for it.
I really want to talk about the figure that is seen when they go back to look at Jesus' body, because we were talking about that in last class, so I brought that up. How
The fact that he himself appears instead of.
so if you don't
Yeah, no,
mind,
go for it.
I think it might be cool to look at what happens in Mark and then Matthew and then John and compare just the people they see when they go. 'Cause I thought it was really fun. So in Mark 16, let's see, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Jesus and Salome. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Okay, and so Jesus does not appear, but this young man is there. And then we talked about this, how in Matthew, it's an angel, right? And that's Matthew 28. Yeah, and so in Matthew 28, does Jesus come as well? Or does he appear later?
Jesus met them as they left the tomb.
Okay.
It says in verse 8, so they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him to fall at his feet and worshiped him.
So in Mark, we have just a man in white robes. In Matthew, we have this angel, and then Jesus appears as they're leaving. And then in John,
And John is
It's
20, like 11 and 2012. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over looking at the tomb. She saw two angels in white sitting there, and the body of Jesus sitting lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. And they're talking about how fast, and then she turns around to leave and doesn't recognize that it's actually Jesus standing right there.
yeah. But I thought that was amazing, because we were talking about that last class, how in Mark, it was just a man, then in Matthew, it was an angel, and now there are two angels. It's one up in each other every time.
It's like when Ian tries to write Virgil tries to write everything better than Ilya.
Yeah.
Anything you can do, we can do.
I just thought that was awesome.
It's a good point.
Why do you think that is? Is it like what you said, like trying to like just do better the next time and like make it better or outdo someone? Or
I don't know if it's necessarily out of his personal motives just to appear a better writer, but maybe to create this more better effect of, I don't know, like as we've been trying to, as we've been saying all this class that
Lay on the theatrics, right?
yes.
I mean, it kind of lends more authority to you if like two angels appeared after you than like just a man. So maybe it's part of like trying to just like build up Jesus and not so much himself but Jesus.
Yeah. Last class we talked about how Matthew added details to like a lot of the stories to end skepticism. Do you guys think that's like applicable in this situation too?
I feel like he chose passages and episodes that he thought were important and then went into detail on them. But like he omitted, a lot of information. But I mean, like this story of Mary Magdalene clearly is well developed. Like it's really drawn out. And same with the other stories. I felt like they were pretty drawn out too. It wasn't just like a, 4-verb or like 4-sentence parable here and then another 4-sentence parable. It was like an actual story that was developed.
Oh, does he at the the final supper with him on Passover. Does he do the communion, this is my body, the bread?
That's
He
excluded.
doesn't. That's what I thought, because I thought that was really interesting, because earlier he talks about himself being the bread.
Yeah.
Where is that? Let's see, that's John 6:47, and sort of
35.
all before that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm the bread of life. No one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting, because it doesn't tell the story of him saying that the bread is his body, but it seems to clearly have that idea in mind. I thought that was so interesting.
Do you think that John's kind of creating more of a pathway to get to God, like kind of creating a middleman? I mean, like, I'm not saying that like none of this happened, but like I feel like John's more like, okay, so you're here, God's over here. To get to God, you have to go through Jesus now, instead of the Jews who are just like, Jews, God. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. Why would he do that? I mean, that's probably not what actually happened, but like, it just kind of seems like he's like throwing a curveball in their way, like, oh,
There's a lot
There's
of
this.
emphasis on
Yeah.
this idea now that the way to eternal life is by believing in Jesus.
Yeah.
As the Son of God. Yeah, that's a big emphasis in this book,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Isn't that the main difference between Judaism and one of the main differences between Judaism and Christianity?
Mhm.
Actually, I don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
Yeah?
Jesus, yeah.
yeah.
Phoebe, we're almost out of time. I want to come back to, if I may, just to come back to a couple of points here. I want to follow up on something that Jennifer said. Why is this different? And I want to emphasize, as the commentator does, that this is a far more sophisticated, rhetorically developed depiction of Jesus' life than the other ones. Okay, it's thought to have originated in in Ionia, in Ephesus, in the Greek-speaking communities along what is now the coast of Turkey, and it really reflects a lot of Greek rhetorical approaches. We saw, for example, the binary structures that are going on, the light and darkness. Okay. The difference between theoretical existence and mortal existence, those kinds of parallels and binary relationships fill this sort of thing. You will see that there is a much greater emphasis on the speeches and the rhetorical aspects of the speeches in John. It's dialogic. It's much more dialogic than the other ones. So you see repeatedly where he will say something and someone will ask him, what do you mean? And we have these dialogues, including, for example, the appearance of Jesus to Mary Magdalene, which is dialogic, where they go in. And that repeatedly, Peter in particular is one of his sort of more frequent interlocutors, but we've seen that in the dialogues of Plato as well, that this author uses the dialogic approach to explain and to elucidate certain things that we see in Plato. There's also the formulaic, there's very sophisticated structures that this author uses. For example, in the 7 signs, each one of them conforms to a certain formula of what are the preconditions, what happens, what's the aftermath, and so on. So there's kind of there is a thematic structure to some of these things. And finally, there's a lot of, we see the binary sort of pairs, but we also see parallelism. For example, Peter denies Jesus 3 times, okay, or disclaims knowledge of him. And then we see at the very end where he appears to him and asks him 3 times, do you love me? Okay. So we see those kinds of connections that fill this. So it's a much more rhetorically sophisticated thing than the ones we've said before. Let me just we're out of time here, but I do think that Casey brought up some really interesting points here. Let me just add 2 more, and that is the interrogation of Jesus by Pilate. And Pilate asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, well, you've said it, okay? But in John, It's much different. And he says, my kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers, this is in John 18:36. If this kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But it is as it is, my kingdom is not from here. So there is a distinctly transcendental emphasis in John that what we see here in the world is really sort of, in a Platonic sense, just a representation of what is really going on, and that Jesus is using, that's why there's so much metaphorical language in here. The final thing is the gift of the Spirit. It all takes place here in John. It doesn't wait until after the Pentecost. He gives the disciples the spirits here, which is, I think, a very big difference in that it sort of empowers the people that are there as opposed to some external, some later event. All right, excellent work. Well done. Thank you, Phoebe. We will we'll reconvene on Wednesday. Remember that we've got this